Yo, 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 welcome back to the Feather Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. My name's Chris Furlong. I am your host, and I'm super excited to be back here having the conversation with you. Episode 98 today, and we are basically coming off from last week's episode. Now, if you did not listen to last week's episode, we dived into, I guess, decanting and exploring cliches and how a big part of those are actually, they refer back to about doing the work. And that in itself is another big cliche, which I think we all get stuck on when we hear conversations with people in interviews, or we hear other people say, you just got to do the work, or you just got to take action. And it's one of those things that we do throw around, and it can come across as very frustrating and very annoying, but at the same time, there's a lot of essence to it, and there's a lot of meat that goes into when we say, you just got to do the work, or do the work, or keep doing the work. Now, there's a lot of works in this episode, so buckle up. We're going to be diving in and getting a little bit more further deep in terms of what does this actually mean. And I wanted to focus on this today simply to help further the point, or really drum into you that the sooner you understand this and the sooner that you click, then the sooner you can start moving forward with less fluff holding you back. But at the same time, I also want to be making sure that you understand that there is no off-the-shelf solution or one-size-fits-all or a perfect way in enabling us to actually get to where we want to be. So we're going to be talking about that today, but really the whole episode will flow like this. We're going to touch on first, what does it actually mean to do the work, or doing the work, and how can we remove that overwhelmment that hovers around it? Because I said before, as we say it, there's a lot of fluff that goes with it, and I want to help debunk that and help you understand what do we actually mean, and how can we make it easy for you to actually do the work and start to move forward. I also am going to be touching on how achieving our goals will be different for everyone, and it's not a one size fit all situation. Like, you can't just take one thing and apply it to everyone. So this is unique to you as well. So you are going to learn something that is relevant to you. We're also going to touch on why should we be flexible, and we should be open to having different paths in achieving our goals or getting to where we want to be. And as I said before, there's not always a clear path or a one set linear path to where we want to be. So that will be another big discussion of this episode. And then we will also dive into a bit of a reminder that it's not always a straight line, as I just said, but it's also important to adapt and be persistent in our pursuit in whatever it is that we're trying to embark on. And for those that are maybe here thinking, oh yeah, I already know what this means, I already know what it means to do the work, I'm already taking action, that's great, but I'm going to ask you, and I'll finish up with asking you a few different questions to challenge your mindset and to challenge you, and that's where we'll wrap it up. So let's dive in. What does doing the work mean? And how can we remove that overwhelmment that hovers around it? So I will be clear, yes, anything takes time and takes effort. Sometimes it will take a lot of time, sometimes it will take a lot of effort, and sometimes it's a mix and match of all that. It might not be a lot of time, but it might be a lot of effort, or it might be not much time, but a lot of effort. And it is that simple. That is the core basics of when we need or want something, there is going to be time and effort that comes into it. But I also understand that's not what you want to hear. That's not why you're here, and that's not what you're wanting to get from this episode. But if we break it down, what is, if we strip it back and start to dive into that cliche of doing the work, what does it actually mean? Well, from my understanding, it means being proactive. Means breaking down big tasks into smaller tasks. It means making progress rather than focusing on the perfection. It's also about continuous improvement and iterations of evolutions in which we can progress. Now, again, there is a little bit of fluff in there. You're like, this all sounds great, but I'm going to be going through all these different points to help you understand from different perspectives, because we all learn differently, we all understand, and we all click in different ways of hearing things. So I'm going to do my best to help make sure that that's going to be possible in this episode. Doing the work, it also means being realistic. It means breaking down the process. What does a big dream really entail? Or what does a big goal, or what does a big mission, or what does a big journey really entail? What does it require of me? Now, I've touched a lot on this over a few episodes, over the last few episodes actually as well. Been focusing on goals and how to actually achieve your dreams and things like that. And this is then again another whole lens of that. It also means, when being realistic, that understanding what can be the timelines for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. There is expectation, or there is expected times in which we create around wanting to make these things happen, but we also need to be realistic and understand it's like, will this take 10 years? Will this take 5 years? Will this take 6 months? Or will it take 2 weeks? And you have to build that expectation based on the assumption that you're doing the work, that you're making the progress, that you're putting in the effort. Because if you're not doing the effort, then the time will be pushed out. Again, these are very basic linear approaches to, I guess, making progress and how we can view and have an understanding of making progress. And it also assumes that you keep doing things. It also assumes that you're making progress. And it also assumes that if you're making progress, you'll eventually make it. Now, in theory, this is actually true. If you keep doing things and making progress, you will eventually make it. But I'm not here to tell you that you just need to keep grinding. I'm not here to tell you that you just got to keep hustling, that you just need to keep doing, and you'll get what you want. I'm here to tell you that, yes, you do need to do things, but how do we do this the right way to make it so much easier for you from a mental capacity, but then also with the effort capacity as well? So what I will tell you is this: if you keep making progress, assessing the progress and applying the learnings, then you will enable momentum. And what was once hard will become easier. It becomes simpler. And then you can start the process again. And by taking the next step up, like walking up a staircase, in which at first it will be hard because you've got to take that step, but then you'll build that momentum and you're able to then enable yourself to be doing whatever it is easier again. And then you can rinse and repeat. Let me give you some examples. Learning a new skill. And I actually spoke about this in my recent newsletter. If you haven't checked out my newsletter, there is a link down in the description, or you can go to calfurlong.com. But essentially, if you want to learn how to play the guitar, if you've never played the guitar before, you want to start learning, right? So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to practice learning today. That might be mean doing some research, actually getting the guitar, having a bit of a strum, and just figuring out where's what and what are the chords, what are the basics, maybe more terminology and theory. Now, you'll do some more practice learning tomorrow, or you need to do some more practice learning tomorrow. And then in a few days, maybe you can start to pick up, hey, I can play a couple of different chords. I can play a few chords in a row, or I can start to strum while playing chords. And then in a few weeks, maybe you can even start to play a bit of a tune or a bit of a song. And then as you start to progress with that consistent practice and learning, you're able to, play a whole song without even looking at sheet music or not even thinking about it. And that is the ability or the power of learning and putting in effort and applying, I guess, learning, repetition, and going through the whole idea of building that momentum, because you don't have to then relearn everything. You've already learned up to this point, so now it's just about how do I learn a little bit more to add to that. Another example of this is learning is like a train going through a tunnel. Everyone wants the light to be back, like it's dark, you're going through a tunnel, whether it's on a train or in a car, it's dark. I mean, you've got headlights, but if you're going through a tunnel, it's dark, right? You get the point. And the only way to get to the light is to travel through to the other side. Now, look, yes, you could go backwards to get it, and a lot of people do this. A lot of us do this. We look ahead and we see it's dark, it's scary. I cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel, therefore I'm not going to embrace that. I'm not going to embark down that path. And that's not really good, because then we never move forward. The only way to get through the tunnel is to go through the tunnel, and then you'll get the light. Another example of this could be building fitness. When we first start a fitness routine, and again, these are very generalized and generic in that sense, but it can be very challenging, and we may struggle to, complete the exercises that we have to do. However, as we continue to work out, as we continue to progress, as we continue to build, a routine of fitness, meaning we can start to improve our fitness and the exercises become easier. Eventually, we can do more reps, or we can lift more weight with ease, or you can run further, etc., etc. Again, if you're not doing any of the effort, you're not going to get any progress. By doing 10 push-ups a day, doing 10 push-ups tomorrow, 10 push-ups the next day, 10 push-ups the next day, you might be able to start saying, I'm going to do 1 push-up extra. Now I'm going to start to do a couple more extra, or they'll become a lot easier to do. This applies with so many other things, like such as building a business. When we first start a business, if you have any relevance to this, for myself, I run a reselling business, and it can feel challenging and it can feel very overwhelming at the start. We all start from zero. However, as we continue to progress, gain momentum, learn the basics of business, how to manage finances, dealing with customers, how do I post things, how do I source things, how do I sell things, it becomes easier to manage and grow. And eventually we can achieve bigger and better goals, we can set bigger and better goals, and we can build a sustainable business with a lot more ease. It also applies to improving our mental health as well. When we first start to work on our mental health, it can be very hard to overcome struggles, because we don't know what we don't know. However, as we make progress in, trying to become comfortable or dealing with our emotions or dealing with our stress or dealing with our mindsets, they can start to change. And what used to be very hard for us to comprehend or very hard for us to deal with becomes a lot easier to manage. Stress, for instance. And again, as the more you do it, the easier it potentially becomes. I'm not saying it's going to be easy just straight away. Over time, it becomes easier. This is like a broken record episode because I talk about this almost every single episode. But now, before you say, oh yes, eventually you'll get here, eventually get there. And that's why I'm saying I talk about this quite a lot. Don't get cynical with me because there's a bit more to this that I want to dive into, right? There's some philosophical concepts or laws, if you will, which, have been around for years, in which people refer to and people have, I guess, based a lot of the theory and how these things work. And I want to go through these. I've actually done a little bit of research and I've pulled them out so I can read them to you. And there's a whole bunch here. I think I've got 4 or 5, might be a little bit more. But the first one is the law of accumulated effort, which states that small, consistent efforts over time will ultimately lead to great results. This concept is related to the idea of compound interest. If you don't know compound interest, it's when you start to, put in small investments over a period of time that can yield significant returns. And an example of this would be, let's say I invest $100 today and do nothing with it for 10 years. And let's say the interest rate is a 5% interest per annual return, meaning every year. So in 10 years, I've put in only $100, but I would then have about $65 of interest on top of that. So I'd have about $165 after the 10 years. I mean, it's passive. I didn't do anything. But the difference is when you start to be consistent, if I invest $100 today and each month for the remaining months of that 10 years with the 5% annual interest, yes, you would have invested $12,000, but you would have also earned $3,593 in interest added to it. So you've actually walked away with around $15,693. As you can see, by that consistency, by adding that consistent routine of putting in $100 every single month for 10 years, you're going to get some really good benefits. The same thing applies to effort and progress. The next law is the law of adaptation, which states that as we continue to work on something, our mind and body adapt to the task and it becomes easier to accomplish. This is related to the idea of muscle memory and the process of skill acquisition. And this is why actually batching and getting into a place or an environment where you can enable your flow state is so important, because all of a sudden you start operating almost like a repetitive machine where you can just do things seamlessly because your body's in the groove. It's like when you start a new routine and if you start getting up early in the morning, and then eventually you'll be waking up just before your alarm because your body knows I need to be up at this time. Or it's like when you start to drive a car, when you first start, it's very hard to, change lanes, to change gears, or to do multiple things at the same time. But then, I'm not saying this is what I do, but as you start to progress with driving, you're able to all of a sudden now you can change gears, you can change indicators, you can turn the steering wheel all at the same time while drinking a milkshake or something, right? It becomes a lot easier. It's muscle memory. Your ability to be able to do becomes proficient and just natural. Another concept or another law is the concept of Kaizen, which is a Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement. Also relates to this idea around the importance of small incremental changes over time in order to achieve long-term success. So just re-emphasizing the same things that we've just been talking about. And lastly, the final philosophy is incrementalism, which is, I guess, the philosophy of change that focuses on making small incremental improvements rather than trying to make big changes all at once. And this, again, talks about the consistent progress over time and that it is more effective than trying to make big changes right away. In the consulting industry, we have different ways of how we go around deploying things. And sometimes we would do a phased approach where you would do part 1, part 2, part 3. So we're deploying in smaller increments, so less chances of issues, or there's a big bang deployment where you just do everything all at once. That can be effective for the right time and the right place, but usually doing it in incremental drops, it means you can manage if there is going to be issues. Same thing applies with how you're making progress. If you want to lose weight and I say, oh yeah, you need to be doing, let's say you need to be doing running. And I say, yeah, if you run a marathon, you'll lose heaps of weight, right? Well, you probably will. You'll probably also be dehydrated. You'll probably ruin your muscles and you probably won't actually be able to achieve it because you've gone out and just tried to run 42 kilometers. But if I say build your way up there, the journey to the 42 kilometers, yes, you're going to lose a lot of weight, you're going to gain a lot of strength, and you're going to gain a lot of stamina and endurance. You can see the difference. So now you understand, I guess, what doing the work essentially means, and doing the effort over time. That's exactly what it means, doing effort over time. So now let's address a couple of other things. There is no one size fits all situation. Also, I want to address around why we should be flexible and be open to taking different paths, and also the importance of adapting and being persistent. So achieving our goals will be different for everyone. I've said this numerous times in this episode, but also in so many episodes before this. And you're probably thinking, or maybe you're thinking, why? Why is it different for everyone? Well, it's simple, really. It's because no one else is like you. We all have different backgrounds. We all have a different experience. We all have different environments in which we have come from or work in. And we have a whole bunch of different set of skills, lessons, and advantages, just naturally. And I've spoken about this before, unfair advantages. And a good way to look at this is if I'm overweight and I have, let's say I've always had a digestion problem or something, which limits how I process my food and how I store fat. And I've never been to the gym before. I've never done a exercise, routine or anything like that. And I want to lose 10 kilos. The process of losing that 10 kilos is going to be very different to the process who is someone that has already been going to the gym or has a gym routine, or they're used to actually regulating their weight on a regular basis, meaning because they've joined competitions or they've lost weight before, and they would then know what is their best dietary intake, right? That is going to be a completely different how they go about losing weight compared to someone who's never done it before, right? So you can't compare. And that is why it's not a one, size fits all situation for everyone. It's important to understand our own situation and then tailor our approach to our own unique situation, because we're different. We're built differently. We have different ideas. We have different skills, and we have the ability to perform differently compared to everyone else. It's also important to remember that our goals and our priorities change over time, which is to my next point, is why we should be flexible and be open to taking different paths to achieving our goals, as there is not always a clear path to take. Now, sometimes we need to go out and discover. Sometimes we need to go out and learn. We need to experience and actually figure out what it is that we want. And I know that is frustrating to hear. And I know it's what a lot of people say, oh, you just need to go get some experience and explore. But hear me out, and I'll explain in a bit more better understanding of my own experience of why this is so important. And it's easy to digest this in a hindsight perspective, but I'm trying to give you that example so you can understand it's okay. So when I was aiming to finish university, I didn't really have any particular jobs I was aiming for. I didn't, say, I want to work at this company. But I figured, because I knew that I was going to have 2 work placements during my university stint, I would leverage one of those to get a job, to land a job. And I did. I actually landed a job out of one of them. The other ones didn't make me an offer. The first one did. And that's where I decided to go. Very loyal to that, but it worked out in my favor. Now, I didn't have any set expectations of that job, what I would be doing. I was keen to get in there because that's what I had signed up to do. I signed the contract and all that jazz. But, what it actually entails, I had no idea, because I'd never worked there in the same capacity of going in as a graduate. I'd only done a little bit of industry-based learning, which was for about it might have been 20 weeks or 6 weeks. I can't remember. I think it was 20 weeks. But regardless, when I joined that company, it was a consulting firm, and I started working as a graduate, of course, and I started in a technical space, and I was working with a deployment management team, and we were doing it for an internet services company, essentially helping deploy updates in a small configuration piece of databases that needed to push data out to the internet servers to tell which products are actually basically being provided to that customer segment. Quite technical, yes. And we were just doing the back end part of that. I then, after a while, I rotated into doing a business analyst kind of role, and I was helping create a bunch of different frameworks around, and actually they'll also design documents as well for superannuation, so super here in Australia, and also around the liquidation of people's estates when they were to pass. So that's completely different to that technical side of things when it came to internet services. Now, after doing that for a while, I then rotated into a role of project management officer. Now, this was more of a junior officer. Think about, I was doing basically helping people roll onto a project. I was, in charge of getting people onboarded to the project, and I was helping those, that team get set up and ready to, go do their job on that project. Now, while doing that, I also took on a bit of a side quest. I'd been doing it for a while, and my lead suggested that maybe I needed some additional experience. I needed to spread my wings a little bit, and he pushed me into a role. When I say push, he did. He gave me that friendly push and said, no, you're able to do this. It will be different. You'll be a little bit uncomfortable, but it will stretch you and help you grow, hence being the additional experience. Now, I worked as a DBT rotator analyst, and what that means is a design build tester for a small reporting application, and we were doing custom reporting for clients. Now, that was completely different again, and I did some, long stint and long hours doing that. Now, after I did that for about 6 months, I think it is. I then had the opportunity to either continue more in that space, technical side of things, or I could come back and do more of project management stuff or PMO. And I was then offered to either come back and lead that role, what I was previously doing, like actually come back not as just the analyst, but come back as the lead, which is what I did. And then eventually I became the manager not too long afterwards. So I went from doing routine tasks of rolling on team members to a project to then managing resource plans of utilization of their time. I then did the separate stint of where I was, doing that design build testing, a bit of a side quest. And then I came back to eventually, in short, this is over a span of, all of this is over the span of 7 years, but I then came back to eventually becoming the lead and the manager of that project management office team, and managing a portfolio of project resources and project budgets, which ranged anywhere between $2 million and $54 million, and with a combined total of over $105 million in portfolio costs. So this all happened over 7 years, right? It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen straight away. It took time. I didn't necessarily know that's where I was going to end up. And now that became my bread and butter, and I spent majority of my time in that field of project management. But you got to understand, and thus this is my point, this is a reminder that it's not always a straight line, but it's also important to adapt and be persistent, because I knew I wanted to be manager, or I knew I wanted to give, working 5 to 7 years here, or I knew I wanted to trial this, or I knew I wanted to be earning this much. I had some back-end goals, but I wasn't really sure what it was looking like or how it was going to look like in getting there. And look, to be honest, there was a few times there where it felt like it was just a mundane routine, waste of time, doing always the same things. But at the same time, I also did some really long nights. I did some 12-hour days. I did 60-hour weeks at some point. But at the same time, I also learned so much. I got to travel, to different countries to do some training in India and Malaysia and all these different places. And I got some really, really good experience. And I learned and met so many people. But every so often, I would pause and I would look back and think, hang on, I'm no longer the guy, taking directions. I'm now the one leading a team, setting the deadlines, coordinating with stakeholders, and managing the money. And when I clicked at that, when I actually zoomed out and think, it will just happen. It felt like that. It took 7 years. And then obviously after that, I stepped away for a 2-year sabbatical and took a chance on myself, doing this podcast, building my business. And here we are 2 years later, and I resigned. But the point is that, things happen over time. Sometimes it will be quick. Sometimes it will feel like a breeze. And sometimes it won't. Regardless, you need to be willing to adapt and adjust as needed to discover, to learn, and to become a better version of yourself. So there are some great analogies of this. And one of my favorite ones, of course, it's easy for me to refer to, is the marathon analogy. Achieving our goals is like running a marathon. It takes consistent effort and training over a long period of time to cross the finish line. The key is to focus on putting in the work every day rather than trying to run, an entire marathon in one day. Maybe a different analogy that's a bit more relevant or not always running related is a gardening analogy, where, achieving our goals is like growing a garden or a veggie patch. It takes time, patience, and consistent effort to cultivate and to care for it. We have to monitor it. We have to, get rid of the pests. We have to manage disease. You have to just be mindful of what you're planting, seasonal, and all that jazz. But just like a garden, our goals require regular attention in order for them to grow and to flourish. There is also a building analogy. Achieving our goals is like building a house or building a complex or building a tower. It takes time, effort, and resources to construct it. Every brick laid or every step taken is a step forward. And the key is you have to keep laying the bricks and not giving up, because if you stop, it's never going to get built. And then another analogy is the bamboo analogy. And this one is, again, growing bamboo takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes years to break through the surface of the ground and grow. However, once the bamboo shoots through the surface, it can grow rapidly, and then it gets that snowball effect, and it starts to just move very quickly in terms of growing. And again, this represents the idea of progress is not always linear, and you have to take small steps first, be consistent to get those big results, and things start to move a lot quicker. And then the final analogy is the oak tree analogy. Now, again, I'm reading these, I've done a bit of research, and they're just really good analogies that are relevant to this conversation. An oak tree is a symbol of strength and persistence because they're big, strong, and bold. And again, it starts so small from an acorn way back when. And over time, with the right conditions and with the right environment, it grows into a powerful tree. Again, this is a reminder that our goals take time and effort to grow, but with patience, persistence, we can also achieve great things. Now, if you're here and you're like, that's great, Chris, I've heard all this before, I've got all this in the bag, I've got it all figured out, I know what I'm doing, thanks for the pep talk, but don't need it. Well, I've got 3 questions for you to challenge you. And look, this is relevant to anyone, but it's also just to make sure that we're keeping ourselves honest and keeping ourselves in check. And here are the 3 questions, and you should ask yourself this. 1, what have I been doing that is getting me closer to where I want to be? 2, what have I been doing that is a distraction but still need to be done, not relevant to your current required actions to get you to where you want to be? And question 3 is, what haven't I done that I should have done? Now, I want you to take those and reflect in your rear view mirror over the last week, over the last month, over the last 6 months, over the last year. What have I been doing that is getting me closer to where I want to be? What have I been doing that is a distraction, like a side quest? And what haven't I been doing that I should have been doing? So I leave it to you. This is your chance to take action. This is your chance to now take the ball, put it in your side of the court, and hit it where it needs to go. You need to start small. You need to start small with building some consistency, get comfortable with that consistency, get into a groove, and then it's a little bit easier when you have motivation for it. And what I mean by that, if you want something and you're enjoying it, it's going to make it a little bit easier. I would also encourage you to monitor the progress. So track your time or reflect on a regular basis. Check your numbers, compare your previous periods, understand how that progress is happening. And then once things start to become a little bit easier and you can start to realize, I've got this, I can do this, this is when you can start to see, where can I now start to grow? What can I take more on of? What can I change? How can I bring this in? How can I level it up a little bit? Maybe I can do 5 more things rather than doing just 5 things. Maybe you can do 10 things, or whether it's building up in your reps in the gym. Maybe it's your distance in running. Maybe it's how many things you're doing for the business. Can you sell more products? Can you call more people? Can you get more leads? There's so many ways you can play at this. It all comes back down to you. Now, once you've done that, you've started small, you're being consistent, you've found a way that you can enjoy it and get some motivation from it. You've got in a groove of monitoring the progress, and now things are starting to become easier. You then rinse and repeat this. That's all you got to do. And there's a really good quote from Abraham Lincoln that says, the best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time. And each day is that chance to, whether it's starting from 0 or just giving you a chance to kind of reflect, refresh, and just get back out there and give it a better shot. You know, every day isn't going to be the same. Every day is going to have its challenges, own set of challenges. And it's how you play that out. You know, you can take it on the chin and you can move forward, or you can sook around if things don't go as planned, or you can adjust, or you can adapt, or you can walk backwards. You can digress, or you can move forward and progress. It really comes up to you. I mean, I hate to break it to you, but it's all on you. But I am here to have that conversation with you and to help you understand that there's so many different ways that we can look at this, so many different understandings and, I guess, laws or philosophies that we can apply ourselves to or take a parallel from to help us understand, like, there is no secret sauce to this. You know, if you want something, it is showing up and getting it done. You know, if you need to finish your assignment for university and it's due in a week's time, you've got a week to do work. You can either do it all the night before, or you can schedule some time in advance and chunk it out into pieces and get it done that way. You can get into a flow state and batch it up so you know that you're only spending 2 hours of that day doing it, and that's that focused time on it. And then you can break it up over 5 or 7 days. There is no secret sauce to this. There's just different ways of how we go about it. And there's easier ways of how we can go about it. But again, you still have to do the work. Really do appreciate you being here. If you do have questions, comments, thoughts about this episode, more than happy to continue the conversation. We are on YouTube. You can drop a comment. You can hit subscribe and make sure you stay up to date to these episodes. If you're listening, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and plenty of other great places. Make sure you are following. Make sure you do subscribe. And if you do enjoy these conversations, if you do enjoy these episodes, I would really appreciate if you could do two things for me. And that is leave a review. If there's a rating or you can leave a review, do that. That would absolutely mean the world to me. And be honest. And the second thing that you can do is if you think this episode could resonate with someone else, give it a share. Send them a link and tell them to go check it out, to have a listen, or maybe send them a timestamp of this episode of where it makes sense for them to go and listen and see if they can make a change to help further their life. Again, appreciate you being here. You have a wonderful day. Cheers.